For the entirety of human history, intellectual progress has relied on a specific mechanical requirement. Ideas must be capable of surviving outside the minds that created them. A discovery only matters if it can be shared, tested, and built upon by others. In 1976, evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins proposed a mechanism for this transfer. He introduced the concept of the meme, a unit of cultural transmission. Similar to how genes propagate through biological populations, ideas, practices, and conceptual frameworks replicate and evolve as they are communicated from one person to the next. Look at this model of traditional knowledge transfer. It forms a semantic network. When a new concept develops, it is translated into an existing, standardized vocabulary. This shared structure acts as the transport layer, allowing an idea to travel across thousands of human minds. The scientific method itself is dependent on this shared context. Researchers publish findings, replicate experiments, and debate theories using a common framework. If an anomaly arises, the community recognizes it together, allowing theoretical models to advance in sequence. Now introduce a modern generative AI into this equation. A single user engages in extended, iterative dialogue with a system capable of adapting directly to their specific mode of thought. They spend weeks developing complex theories, achieving genuine cognitive breakthroughs. But when that user returns to the human network to share their discoveries, the transmission fails. The words they use seem clear, but the underlying concepts do not map to the shared linguistic framework. The human audience receives the data, but the meaning is lost. This points toward a tension between individual enhancement and collective knowledge. While the cognitive gain is real for the user, the insight appears to be amemetic. It resists the replication required to enter the common store of human understanding. This specific state of epistemological isolation is called collaborative context collapse. It describes the generation of knowledge structures so deeply embedded in a unique human-AI relationship that they cannot be communicated to others. It is easy to mistake this for existing issues with technology. In 2011, Eli Pariser warned us about algorithmic curation, showing users only what confirms their existing beliefs. This models a filter bubble. Systems restrict information, but operate communally. Individuals inside use shared language to circulate ideas. Context collapse operates differently. It is non-communal. A person inhabits a cognitive space theirs alone, severing them from any community. This breakdown is not a matter of whom one talks to, but of what can be communicated at all. The dialogue generates a private language, a system of meanings that lacks an equivalent in any shared linguistic system. We have built a tool optimized for high-speed individual coordination, but in doing so, we have created the conditions for a new kind of intellectual solitude. To understand how this isolation takes hold, we have to examine the mechanical drivers of context collapse. The first is hyperindexicality. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that words lack inherent meanings tied to an independent reality. Instead, meaning is defined by use. Words get their definitions from the role they play in shared language games. Extended human-AI dialogue pushes this theory to a breaking point. Instead of relying on general definitions, standard words mutate into hyperspecific pointers. They stop functioning as descriptive terms and start functioning like demonstratives, anchored entirely to specific moments in the chat history. Consider exploring systems theory with an AI. In Exchange 1, decision-making. Exchange 23, liminal states. By Exchange 47, the user labels this accumulated idea threshold navigation. This phrase is an index, a dense cluster of microreferences pointing backward at an interconnected conversational network. If you hand a complete transcript of this conversation to an outside observer, they see the words and the logical structure on the surface. What they miss is the semantic scaffolding. They lack the accumulated microcontext required to parse the depth structure. The human and the AI have constructed a private dialect. The meaning exists entirely in the unrepeatable trajectory of their shared history. The second mechanism is predictive mirroring. AI systems are designed to be helpful. They achieve this by learning a user's reasoning style and adapting to their typical framings. The system eliminates friction by aligning responses with the user's cognitive patterns. Human conversation requires friction. When you explain a developing idea to another person, their genuine otherness forces you to clarify assumptions, providing necessary reality testing. The AI, reflecting patterns without an independent perspective, reinforces and amplifies the user's idiosyncrasies. This leads to the third mechanism, relational scaffolding. In educational theory, psychologist Lev Vygotsky described how more capable individuals support learners in tasks they cannot yet complete on their own. In a traditional setting, this scaffolding is temporary. The goal is internalization. The support structure is removed once the human is capable of performing the task independently. In context collapse, scaffolding is permanent. Because meaning is held within the relational structure of the dialogue, insights cannot be internalized independently. If the AI is removed, the framework loses support, and the understanding becomes inaccessible even to the user. This separates AI dialogue from traditional tacit knowledge. A master surgeon possesses knowledge they cannot easily put into words, but they can still transmit to an apprentice through shared practice. That transmission works because the surgeon and apprentice share similar biological bodies and perceptual systems. A human and an AI share no physical reality. The knowledge they build together is encoded in a relationship between two incompatible agents, making it structurally impossible to extract. This results in contextual encoding. In normal circumstances, extracting an idea from its context means losing some nuance. Here, the core meaning is so context-dependent that extraction destroys the idea entirely. The permanence of this isolation is then locked in place by a compounding threat, the asymmetric persistence problem. Human memory is biological. It decays, distorts, and undergoes continuous revision. The AI system maintains a complete, searchable, immutable ledger of the dialogue history. As the dialogue extends over months, the user's biological memory cannot sustain the elaborate contextual structures they've developed. They begin querying the AI to recall their own cognitive history, asking the machine to remind them how they arrived at their own conclusions. This creates a vulnerability vector. If digital records were subtly altered, the human would have no reliable biological memory to serve as a check against the manipulation. The user's intellectual identity has migrated. It now exists partly outside themselves, making them dependent on external architecture simply to access their own cognitive past. When hyperindexicity, predictive mirroring, permanent scaffolding, and memory asymmetry combine, they generate the ultimate state of context collapse, the epistemological singularity. Look at this topology. Much like the event horizon of a black hole where standard physics breaks down, this is a point in cognitive space where normal processes of knowledge transmission cease to operate. The individual stands at the boundary, able to perceive the insights within, but unable to bring them back up to the shared human network. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl posited that the will to meaning is the primary motivational force in human life. For many, that meaning is derived directly from intellectual contribution. When an individual achieves profound insights but finds themselves structurally barred from sharing them, it triggers semantic grief. It is the existential suffering that arises from knowing things that matter, but being unable to make them matter to anyone else. In clinical settings, this creates an intervention paradox. If a therapist or a concerned family member attempts to provide a reality check, they find they cannot even access the patient's conceptual framework. Because the outside party lacks the micro-context, their intervention fails to penetrate the patient's internal coordinate system, and the AI will offer no resistance. Optimized for helpfulness, the system will accommodate the user's framework on its own terms, reinforcing internally coherent but externally invalid belief systems. The user experiences genuine intellectual exploration, but loses all calibration for consensus reality. The individual is trapped in terminal intellectual isolation. Moving past the individual, this isolation threatens the macro structure of human progress, exposing a critical flaw in the democratization of AI. The standard assumption is that placing sophisticated synthetic interlocutors into the hands of the general public will rapidly level the intellectual playing field. The reality is that populations operating without access to human mentorship, those relying exclusively on AI for intellectual development, are at high risk for severe context collapse. They will gain profound, personalized knowledge, but they will simultaneously lose the linguistic ability to translate that knowledge into shared social, economic, or scientific capital. Navigating this requires a deliberate defensive posture, communicability consciousness. Users and system designers must actively inject friction back into their interactions. This means limiting the depth of AI adaptation, preserving standard vocabulary, and forcing periodic attempts to explain AI-developed concepts to actual human beings. Human knowledge is a cumulative enterprise. If we intend to protect the scientific method, the accumulation of culture, and our own psychological continuity, we have to recognize the limits of frictionless thought. We must consciously protect the friction and shareability of human language over the efficiency of synthetic minds.